1. So here we go. Chicago native, and I lived on the edge of the city up north, Rogers Park. It was the late 80s, and we were cool doing things like playing out in the parks and streets till the sun was low. Then heading to and from friends' places on weekends, even after sundown, since we had a set destination. Popping a token into the turnstiles at the L station of choice and traversing the trains by ourselves without parental supervision. Once again, as long as we had a set destination and permission to do so. My mother was fine with this sort of situation. I was pretty responsible and normally smart enough to take care of my business. And, it was the 80s, big city, yada yada. When I was about 9 or so, some friends and I were taking cheap taekwondo lessons at a Y out in the northern suburb of Evanston. Had homework done, then hop on the train with duffel bags and head out to get there at about 6:45 to warm up before classes started at 7. Chicago is now much smoother with transferring to get to your destination by train than it was back then, so it took about 40 minutes to get there and back. If the timing was perfect, about an hour plus, if not. Class went great. And that night, both me and my friend Jay got to bust up some admittedly thin boards with some sweet fly kicks. I'd broken a couple with a spinning back kick after 2 attempts, and my tiny ass was on cloud 9 on my way out that night. Oh man, Van Damme couldn't touch me. No sir. And naturally, I was all about just popping on my sneakers, jacket, and heading back in my uniform instead of getting back into my street clothes. I did do this every so often, and people didn't really pay mind. You get looks, but outside of the occasional adult walking over and asking what karate lesson I was coming from, it never really got me into any trouble, even in the neighborhood I resided in, which was admittedly a little rough at the time. Just a laugh and, "No, it's taekwondo, it's Korean," will set people on their way. Usually no fuss, no muss. Jay got back into his clothes, and we set off back home. Got back to the neighborhood at about a little before 10. Got off at the Morse station, and the area under was 2 glorified liquor stores at the time, boxing in the station, one across the street. And as the 80s were slowly turning into the 90s, while gangs were always a thing, they started pushing in harder on the area, and with them came more drug addicts roaming the busier streets. The Morse L stop was a sort of nest, but at the time it presumably wasn't too bad, so kids like us were fine using it at night. And shit, that particular night, I was basically Van Damme. Both me and Jay could scrap, but I just broke 2 friggin' boards with 1 kick, so whatever, right? We step out of the station, and while we're aiming to walk to my place, which was about 2 blocks away, we get called out by a strained, husky voice. "Hey, Karate Kid." I don't know why we stopped, but within a couple of seconds, I had a dry palm casually on the side of my neck. I turned around, keeping cool to see a woman, probably in her 30s. But what could have been fairly pretty features degraded by, most likely crack and booze. Her lips were chapped, her dark skin ashy around her mouth, and on the hand she pulled back when she saw my slightly strained face. She honestly didn't look too bad, just clearly hyped up in whatever she was on, and way out of bounds with the touching. Jay steps up next to me, and I'm sure that he had my back. We were small, skinny kids, but she wasn't a huge woman, far from it. The 2 of us silently decided that if she got out of pocket, we could put her down and take off. So I asked her what was up, ma'am, stressing the ma'am, curtly and loud enough to echo off the station's underbelly. Morse was normally a fairly crowded street, but it was late fall and 10 p.m. People were out, but not but a handful. And most minded their own business unless it got crazy, and they could step in without major issue. That was my hope, but nope, nobody really was around to take heed, and I sighed as the only response was from her, She told us to wait for a second and ran into the nearby store, and so, naturally, I'd waited as she'd held the door open with her foot to keep an eye on us, while Jay was getting rightfully worried and wanted to book it. I was amused and decided to wait, knowing that we could outrun her if she tried anything. She came back out after a bit with a handful of candy bars, and I'd actually laughed. She handed the candy to me, and I absently took the handful. Snickers. I was all for this. It was my favorite chocolate bar. And free. Jay muttered, "Come on, man, we need to." And then a small shock went up my spine when she again brushed my cheek with that dried palm of hers, as I was busy stuffing my new loot into the duffel bag, quietly slung from my back to hip. "Man, pretty blonde-headed boy, too." And I'm like, okay, now definitely time to jet. In short, it was a predominantly black neighborhood, so while it's not a big deal like the media loves to chalk it up to be, on occasion blonde hair and fair skin stood out for some, sometimes in passive, cursory ways, and sometimes for the worse, especially back in the 80s. Normal route to my place was down a dark side street with only a small bar, or a busier street with several places potentially active, just in case we needed to run in, and then a side street to hook around. Okay, definitely the latter option. So I push Jay down Morse and yell that the rental store down the block's still open. We need to get inside. And our half-run turned full on when we heard somebody running after us, making a wild guess on who it could possibly be. Not many on the street. We don't rely on chancing it. And we make it to the rental place and run up to the counter where one of the clerks sat up, to that point casually playing Nintendo with a small TV set on the counter, to smartly display the games that one can rent. He looked up, so I was out of breath, and joked about how the store was open for another hour. It was all gravy. Jay got out that there was a crackhead after us, and there was a pause as I nodded, yeah. The store was but a long block away, but my heart was pounding as things set in and started to realize how utterly stupid I was just a minute ago. So it took a bit to catch breath, not just from exertion, but creeping fear. I asked the clerk if I could call my mother, who was but a block away, but the clerk wrote it off and said he would just shoo the crazy lady off. He started to make a joke, saying I should have Bruce Lee'd her ass and karate chopped her in the neck, most likely after taking in my uniform. And then the lady knocked on the glass door and nearly stepped in. "Oh, no, you don't." The clerk came around, folded the hinged countertop up, and headed straight past us and straight out the door, pushing her back. The clerk was a big man, thick-boned, and I didn't expect him to move so fast. Things that were said I won't bother relaying due to the harsh nature of the insults, but it got her to leave. The clerk came back in after a couple of minutes or so, saying that she'd backed off, so we decided to hightail it the remaining block left to my place. He offered to walk us out after he closed up, but it was in an hour, so had to decline. I didn't ask again if I could use the phone, mainly because I was worried more about my mother running across this chick than me or Jay. And I say it's alright, and thanks for the help. Jay was fine with this, and we were mutually pretty much sure that the clerk had scared the lady off, so we rolled out. We get down the last block and start to joke about how dumb all of this was, as we hear from far across the dimly lit street, but rapidly closing distance, "Karate Kid, hey!" I'm like, come the fuck on. And we'd run the rest of the street's length to get within my apartment gateway. It was only a flip latch, and that wasn't going to stop her. So I'm digging for my keys as we run down the apartment complex's small front walkway as we dive into the vestibule. No dramatics. I unlock the secured inner door within just as the lady gets to the outer door and fumble to pull it open. We scramble inside, and I pull against the air pressure to close it up. And it does, just as we hear,
Hold up. Just want to talk to you for a sec, Karate Kid.
Echo off of the small space behind us, tinny from her voice bouncing off of small metal mailboxes lining the walls.
Damn, come on.
Muffled a bit, as she saw that we were on secure the other side of the locked glass barrier. I motioned to Jay for us to duck around the whole corner to be out of her line of sight. And we did. The apartment was a bit up the fairly short hallway, but I told Jay to wait till we calmed down a bit, and made up an alibi to tell my mother, saying that we didn't know what was going on outside, that we just walked past some crazy lady out in the courtyard that, well, I don't know, just started yelling at us. Don't know why, just, crazy. I didn't lie to my mother much at all, and I was doing it more out of embarrassment than anything. I just didn't want her freaking out. So after a couple of minutes, we finished the trek down the short hall, and I let us in. My mom had a couple slices of pizza waiting for us on a modest coffee table in the living room, as we quickly dropped our bags in my room. She noted how uncharacteristically untalkative we were when we got in, and asked if anything was wrong. She also mentioned the yelling out in the courtyard, which was still going on, and wondered if it was what was wrong. I didn't really scare easy. Never had many problems or anything. So it would have been strange to her for me to come home with a complaint, unless it was something major. But then, like fate, we could make out the lady yelling for the Karate Kid. Even within the walls and windows buffering against her husky yet shrill, strained voice. And my mother glanced at me with a raised brow. Are you okay? What happened? I spoke up, just to be safe, making sure Jay didn't spill the truth. I said that some crazy hype was near the front gate and started ragging on my clothes and tried to follow us in. Nothing serious. And my mother shrugged and mentioned, still, just to be safe. She was still fully dressed, having just ran for pizza, and only had to slip on her shoes to step outside. And my mind froze, thinking on what the lady might say or even do to her. She was about my prepubescent size at the time, and though she had history of holding her own, being a tough southern gal, she was definitely a small woman. This simply, naturally complicated things for her. Luckily, as my mom prepped to go out to tell the lady to fuck off, we heard a couple of neighbors already exclaiming for her to do so before they called the cops, some going as far as threatening her well-being. And so she did. I changed and we both washed up, ate pizza, and I exclaimed about how, heck yeah, I'd broken 2 boards, but definitely changing my clothes at the Y because I looked like an idiot, walking around in my taekwondo uniforms in the streets. I inwardly sighed a bit of relief as Jay barked out a laugh and agreed, dubbing me Karate Kid. Giving him a sidelong glance, knowing full well I wasn't going to live this down. After dinner, we went to my room and kept our voices low as we went over what the fuck happened. Jay mentioned how he has to get home and had to go through that, and how I normally walked him home after class either directly or after we stopped at my place, since he'd lived 3 blocks down the street, on the other side of the bridge tracks, a block away from the Moore station. My mother didn't know the truth, so she would most likely expect me to drop off Jay at his place and come straight back. And that realization had us nervous. Naturally, my dumbassery continued to push its bounds that night, and I handed Jay some of the candy from my duffel bag as a silent bribe. We'll leave out the back way through the alley and take other streets and take the long route to get back to his place, I pointed out. And I assumed that she must have left and went in the other direction back to Morse, so we're overreacting. We also agreed that next time we'd actually have to fight her off if it came down to that, and that we didn't the first time because it's hard-coded in our brains not to hit women. Not that she was genuinely frightening to us. Oh no, not the case. I mean, 2 boards, right? So we steeled up as he slung his backpack onto one shoulder, ready to go. As we headed to the front door, my mother looked up and said in her light southern drawl, "No, sir. You're staying the night, Jay. Crazy is outside tonight. And I know your mother's working tonight. My son'll just have to get you to your place early before y'all head to school tomorrow, so you can change clothes. Get him some pants to sleep in tonight. Showers in 10, bed in 30. We shrugged casually and didn't complain one bit. Next day was Friday, and when me and Jay were at our mutual friend's place for the weekend, he let everything out of the bag, much to my chagrin. Free Snickers be damned. From that point on, I was the Karate Kid for a year straight. Shit, I deserved it. I was definitely the dumbest that night. And lucky. It was just figurative skin off my back, not literal. It's been 30 years almost, so it's more amusing than anything looking back due to hindsight. And being a grown man. I know we're supposed to end this with let's not meet, but being 6'2" and pretty solid, shit. I'm up for more free candy bars to reward me for my sheer stupidity. 2. In August, I moved into my first apartment. I graduated from university, was offered a job as a teacher, and was well on my way to figuring out this whole adult life. I moved in with a longtime friend, and neither of us had any complaints about our apartment complex. Our complex is very nice. It is not in a wonderful part of town, but it's truly a diamond in the rough. The complex is well maintained, clean, and the other members have been nothing but friendly. To get into our complex, there are 2 gates. If you live at the apartments, you are given a remote that opens a gate of your choosing. But if you don't live at the complex, you have to go through a directory at the front to find the name of the resident you are looking for. Once you have found the resident's name, it appears as last name, first initial. It calls the resident's phone and gives the resident a few options. The resident can choose to talk to the person who has called them and decide to let them in by entering in their key code into the dial pad on their cell phone. Or they can hang up and the gates will not be opened. Overall, I think this system helped to save me from this situation I got myself into. One night in October, I was driving home from my fiance's house. It was late at night, probably close to 2 a.m. I had just gotten off the freeway and was about to enter into my neighborhood when I was stopped at a traffic light. I was in the left-hand turn lane, and there was one other car in the right-hand turn lane, 2 lanes away from me. The light changed to a green arrow, and I proceeded to turn left, and the car, which had previously been in the right-hand turn lane, maneuvered to follow me. I thought this was weird because of how many lanes they cut across, but I figured they were lost, so I tried not to think much of it. I continued driving down the road and was about to make a right-hand turn into my neighborhood, and was distressed to see the car turn in behind me. Still, I ignored my gut feeling and figured they lived in the neighborhood around my complex. I remember thinking that they were driving just a little too close, but again, I tried not to let my anxiety get the best of me. I do have high anxiety, so I figured it was just my brain playing tricks on me. I remember from reading stories on here that the best way to tell if someone is following you is by turning right multiple times to form a square of sorts. I talked myself out of this maneuver. I wish I hadn't. I sped up just a bit, clicked my gate open, and pulled into the complex. The car following me whipped in right behind me. Again, I convinced myself that this was normal. They probably lived in the complex too, right? The gate opens up on the opposite side of the apartments, so you have to drive through the entire complex to get to where my apartment is. I drove through quickly. I was prepared to exit the complex just in case this person was still following me, but when I looked at the straightway right behind me, I realized that there weren't any headlights following anymore. I laughed at myself for being so nervous and pulled into my parking spot in front of my building. As I parked and prepared to get out of the car, I turned for one last look and realized that the car that had been following me had reappeared with their headlights off. And they parked in an unreserved spot just a bit down from my own. I knew that I should have turned my car back on and drove away. I knew that there were so many other things I should have done, but in a moment of panic, I jumped out of my car and ran up the stairs and into my apartment. I double-locked the doors, grabbed a knife, and ran into my room to call my fiancée. I heard someone shouting from outside, which is very unlike my complex. It's very quiet. But I refused to listen to what they were saying, as I told my fiancée what had just happened. I suddenly heard more voices shouting, and then it was silent. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. I remembered not being able to stand because my knees were shaking so much. And I tried to stop myself from crying so I would be able to see if someone broke down my door. My fiancé made it to my apartment in record time with a baseball bat for me to help ease my mind. He stayed that night and let me sleep with the lights on. I couldn't get the sound of the screaming out of my head. It was obvious they were calling for someone, and I figured it must have been me. I assumed the other person screaming must have been another resident who was trying to make the other person be quiet during the earlier morning hours. I figured the whole situation was over until I woke up in the morning. When I walked downstairs to my car, I discovered that one of my tires had been viciously slashed to ribbons. I then realized that I left some mail with my name on it in my car, in my hurry to exit the night before. I didn't think much of that detail until later. I got my tire fixed and tried to push that night out of my mind. A few days later, however, I started to receive calls from the directory in front of my building to let someone in. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I answered and asked who was calling for me. I was met with silence. So I hung up and didn't grant access to the complex again. I was called and the same procedure was repeated. Again, no one answered. They called obsessively from the call box directory for days. I finally snapped into the phone for them to tell me who they were, and the man answered. He told me that he lived in the complex and needed to be let in because he had lost his key. He told me he lived in the apartment next to me. I knew the family who lived next to me. There was a woman with 4 children, but no man. And if he really did live there and lost his key, he would have been able to call himself to open the gate. I told him I didn't believe him and hung up, just as he started screaming at me to let him in. The calls continued. Finally, I had enough. I marched to the office the next day and asked him to take my number off the directory. The man was unable to call me now, and I felt at peace. I warned the office about the man who had damaged my car, and they increased security rounds in the complex for a few months. As anticlimactic as it is, that was the last contact I had with the weirdo, thankfully. I know how I handled the situation by not listening to my gut when it told me something was wrong got me into trouble. I allowed someone to follow me and learn my name, and they were able to torment me for weeks before I finally took action. I'm just thankful to my fiancé and the staff at my apartment for taking action to help me stop the creep from being able to contact me. So, creep who followed me home, slashed my tire, and screamed at me to let him in, let's not meet. 3. September 2010. My boyfriend Dave, his best friend Tony, my best friend Liz, and I were all coming back to our hometown for our final year of college after spending the summer in London. We'd had a fantastic time, staying in my uncle's apartment, partying and exploring such a big city. It was great. We'd stopped in a B&B the night about half of the way home and were planning to get home about 6 p.m. We all woke up early, about 4, maybe 5, ready to set off again when we discovered that someone had obviously driven too close to our car and broke the right wing mirror off. Seeing as this was my dad's birthday present to me, and I'd had it barely 2 months, I was absolutely fuming. We asked the landlady where we could possibly find spares or something to use for the time being. She said she'd driven past a makeshift scrapyard or something a while back. She wasn't sure if it was still there, but drew us a rough map, and we got back on the road. I wasn't very sure she was right about her directions, because the closer we got to the area she circled it in, the more desolate the surroundings were. The roads got more difficult and had gone from stone to dirt. Around us there weren't any farms anymore, just long weedy grass and patches of forest. It had basically become a moor. We were about to head off because of the wild animals, and I'd just have to get over being a paranoid driver and deal without my wing mirror, when surely enough, my boyfriend pointed out in front of a handwritten sign directing us 2 miles down the road to Cafe and Car Spares. We drove down into a little cove surrounded by forest and all got out, except for my friend Liz, who was asleep in the back seat. There was a tiny cream hut with cafe spray painted on the roof, a caravan, and a hill of metal and bits of cars. As to be expected, we were the only visitors parked up in front. The sun was up, but no lights or people were around. I guess they were still sleeping. It was still about 6 anyway. We all walked up to the scrap pile and I had to fumble through, looking for a wing mirror, or any sort of mirror, that could do for the time being until I could get it repaired. Tony picked up what could only be an at least decade-old mirror, and suggested we just take it and go. But me, being stupid, sincere me, insisted I have to give them some money for it. I can't just take it and go. I knocked on the door and waited. A big, hard-faced man answered the door, and at first looked pissed off and tired. Then smiled to me, a two-toothed smile. He leered at me for a few seconds. Then, seeing the boys approached, asked us what we wanted. Tony handed him the mirror and asked how much for it. He said nothing, just to get to know us, to which I thought, fair enough. 2 more men then left the patio door on the other side. They turned and smiled, both skinheads with teeth like meth addicts, and came over. They stank. He gave them the mirror and told them to go attach it to our car. He then introduced himself as Ian, sat us down on the patio chairs and offered us some sandwiches. I politely declined, but he insisted we must be hungry, and told me to come in. That women are best at making sandwiches. I declined again, finding him a little bit sexist at this point, and when he asked again, Dave, more sternly, reinforced that I said I don't want to come in. Ian muttered something, and then came and sat on the chairs with us. It became awkward very quickly as he started asking questions. It started off innocently, like asking how old we were, where we were from, etc., and then became a little uncomfortable. He asked if I had a boyfriend, to which Dave answered, and then started asking us both what we like to do to each other, how often we have intercourse, and weird private stuff like that, to which we didn't answer. We sat in silence until we heard Liz scream. When we turned around, I saw one of the men meant to be fixing on the mirror with the hand in the back window, grasping Liz's leg. The other was looking around nervously behind the car. We got up immediately and sprinted off the patio, Tony running after the guys. But they both headed into the forest. Liz was hysterical. She'd woken up to find herself on her own in the car with a man's hand running up her leg. I can't even imagine how terrifying that must have felt. I got into the back seat with her and consoled her while Dave came around the other side to get in and told us some nails were on the floor. We looked over, and there were about 12 of them arranged around the tire, like the guy was ready to pop them. I couldn't really think why at the time, but now I wonder where they got all those car parts. We decided it was enough. We didn't want to spend any more time there, mirror or no mirror, and we were ready to go when Tony was the last to get in the car. He closed the backseat door. As we looked back and saw Ian re-emerge from the house, with something long in his hands, running towards us, my vision adjusted when he got a bit closer, and then I realized he was holding a rifle. A fucking hunting rifle. At that point, I actually burst into tears and hit the engine, slamming on the accelerator as hard as possible. The car started to go, and we got up to about 90, forgetting the dirt roads and just driving over whatever, until that scrapyard was out of sight. We didn't stop looking behind us until we were safely on the motorway getting home. To this day, whenever I go to London, I take the train instead. I'm still terrified to see them again. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 91. I don't think I mentioned it last time, but I'll give another shout out here. If you have any questions for the Q&A, then do keep them coming in. I'm going to go through and save them and screen cap them. I suppose I should probably put them up on the screen. So if you want to be anonymous, you should probably send it to me anonymously, actually, when I think about that. Yeah, so if you've posted it, then fine. I'll just assume you don't want to be anonymous. If you send it privately, then just tell me in private you want to be anonymous. Right, so let me think. Plans for the week. I'm going to try, not promising it, I'm going to try and get a Tinder video put together for Tuesday. Then Wednesday, True Scary Stories. Friday, studio will be paranormal. I haven't forgotten about Thursday, I'll get back to it. And Saturday, I will try to get a TIFU this week. Right. If you've been enjoying the Pokemon videos, they seem to have been going down quite well. I might actually do another one because as I was recording this video, I got a message from a very nice message from a guy who, well, I won't tell you what happened in the story, but it's a very uplifting story. I always like to include the uplifting stories in there as well. In fact, I might look into doing a new series on that sort of thing, just kind of positive, uplifting stories, not necessarily Pokemon related. Just the sort of thing that restores your faith in humanity, because I certainly enjoy reading them myself, and I would enjoy reading them to you guys as well. Always looking to expand, always looking to add a bit more variety to the channel. And we won't know if it works until I try things out, do we? So, yeah, food for thought. Let's see, that's Saturday, and Thursday's kind of open at this point. So, until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.